Harley's biggest secret is finally out. Riders everywhere are talking about the Milwaukee-Eight engines that run hot, lose oil, and leave owners stranded. Harley calls it normal. But leaked files say otherwise, and they're spreading fast. If you 19 to 20 need to hear this before your next ride. The clock's ticking before their way. If you thought symptom nobody wanted to name, it started like the owners rolled out their new touring bikes, feeling that signature happening. Engines that should have run smooth started gasping. All whispered through. One rider described hearing his own heart skip a beat. Another said his would glide felt thirsty for it was breathing through a straw. At first, riders blamed heat riding style. Dealers echoed one line, "It's normal." His legacy made that believable, while failures multiplied. On four, lifelong owners compared notes, rising confidence, where his veterans realized identical coincidence. Led by a brand they trusted. By 2007, with to ignore, bikes with barely spring like old machines to afford that legendary found themselves. They had bought the dream, but something inside it was the silence. Harley-Davidson, the company, acted like nothing was wrong. The cracks in that silence were just beginning to show. But inside Milwaukee, behind closed doors, there was paperwork that told a different story. Inside the service bulletin, the leak didn't come from an engine this time. Or printer. A confidential dealer bulletin posted online in the 18. It described customer report oil transfer concerns and unintended oil migration between cavity. That sterile, which hid a grim truth. The bulletin was Harley's first quiet admission that something inside the Milwaukee-Eight wasn't working as promised. Engineers knew it, dealers knew it, riders didn't. Within the bulletin, technicians were told how to test for suction where oil pools in the crankcase instead of circulating freely. The instructions were clear. Drain the crankcase, measure the oil, compare it to factory. Then note any excess. To the untrained eye, that looked like routine. Seasoned mechanics, it was a red tag. You don't measure pool unless you know it can happen. Dealers who followed the bulletin quietly fixed a few bikes under warranty, replacing pumps and breathers. But the company never issued a public statement, never alerted owners, and never used the word defect. Riders paid without knowing they were fixing a design flaw baked into the very heart of. Some dealers even apologized privately, admitting their hands were tied by It wasn't sabotage. It was survival. Company culture valued secrecy over transparency. But even whispers left traces, and those traces led to a redesigned part that Harley hoped nobody would notice. If you've ever owned a Harley or felt let down by a hit that like button now. Drawn together, the harder it becomes for them to pause. The new pump that fixed the past. Late in 2019, editors noticed something. A new oil pump assembly for the Milwaukee-Eight. It carried a fresh part number. The quiet. Improved oil flow. No press release, no announce. Blindness. Those who worked on engine living knew what that. Fine a pump unless the old one failed to do its job. Technicians who installed the new pump reported instant differences. Oil returned faster, heat dropped, and crankcases stayed dry even on long rides. It worked so well that Harley made it standard on the 2020 lineup and, tellingly, allowed it to retrofit older models. Decision spoke volumes. The Ricks were perfect. Would be no need to retrofit. The company was fixing the flaw quietly, repairing history without admitting history needed repair. Independent engineers A pump scavenger stage could cavitate under sustained heat, trapping air pockets and starving the lower end of lubrication. That simple design issue caused a cascade of failures, from worn bearings to seized pistons. It was a defect of physics, not user error. The improved pump solved it, but the absence of a public explanation. To owners' anger. Paid top dollar for reliability and ended up as unpaid beta testers. Yet if a recall, Harley doubled down on discretion. If you're I'll start with solid gear and accessory. I've linked my go-tos description. Versus recall, the language of don't. When automakers discover a flaw that threatens reliability, they issue a recall. When Harley won, it wrote a bulletin. The difference seems small. He replies, a recall, letters, public. Only between the factory and dealers. It's the corporate version of a whisper. In memo. Defect, swapping them for sensitivity. Others were told that the loss was normal, even as mechanics strain excess quartz. By calling it a service advisory, Harley dodged recall. Truth reached owners only after damage was done. This tactic saved millions in recall costs, but cost something far greater: credibility. Company that built its empire. City. Some longtime dealers struggled with warning loyal customers to, while pretending it was routine service. Unwilling to disconnect between the official or was glaring. And that policy left one haunting question hanging in every garage. This silence, who protected the riders now? The riders turned investigator. The pattern, the robbers did it themselves. Across the country, garages became laboratories. Men and women who once trusted Harley-Davidson bays began tearing their own Milwaukee-Eight engines apart, documenting every scar and every drop of oil that refused to turn home. What began as frustration into a movement of data. Riders started tracking year, mileage, and build. They built spreadsheets, shared photos of drained crankcases, and compared oil and out. These that showed contamination long before the factory admitted anything. Tube teardown videos exposed scorched pump, starved bearings are hid. Tired Michigan engineer modeled the flaw, proving oil trapped in the head starved the sun. His viral report ignited the Harley community's demand for accountability. Soon, the data collection, Botical, forum standardized template for documenting breakdowns, complete bin numbers, and oil sample results. Readers discovered that batches, mostly built between 2017 and 2019, failed. Factory called coincidence looked pattern. Harley might have had official bulletins. Writers now had something better. Proof grounded in, not in marketing. And when ordinary people gathered this much truth, the lawyers were far behind. Lawyers smelled SD. Law firms across several states began taking calls from frustrated owners who'd paid thousands for lawyers that never last. Writers knew too much and said too little. Within months, it began forming. Each complaint told the same story in different voices. Harley-Davidson. Bikes with a hidden Boltons and failed to recall or reimburse properly. The first major filing was California. Negligence, concealment, warranty. Soon another appeared in tech, by dozens of owners and a handful of sympathetic mechanics. Leaked vacations from dealerships became exhibits, revealing how regional managers instructed departments to reassure customers rather than document defects. Terms that was devastating. A paper trail of denial is still a paper trail. Attorneys interviewed former employees under a confidentiality agreement, confirming what writers years. Engineers were management about oil starvation risks during or testing. Those warnings never made it to the. In depositions, technicians described receiving updated parts with no written explanation to install fixes while pretending the issue was minor. The legal filings turned those experiences into official evidence. But anger doesn't just hit the courtroom, it hits the wallet. As lawsuits bought, storm began brewing in the marketplace itself. When loyalty loses view for decades, Harley-Davidson motorcycle were one of the safest financial bets in motorcycling. A 5-year-old Street Glide could sell for nearly what it cost new. The brand carried a pride, but that changed the moment the Milwaukee-Eight scandal reached public ears. Suddenly, Eight values collapsed. Dealers were by thousands, citing liability concerns. Owners discovered that their symbol of freedom had turned into a liability parked in their garage. At auctions, Harleys piled up as buyers asked, "Has the pump been replaced?" Trust banks ripped fakes or refused loans. And the brand once powered but loyal now struggled under the weight of doubt and risk. Numbers told a brutal story. Bottle that once held % of its original view now fetched back. In financial terms, that meant a $10,000 hit for the average owner. Heavier, the prod. These riders didn't see themselves. To realize that legacy had been cheapened by corporate silence felt like betrayal twice so. That tremor reached all the way to Milwaukee, or beginning to see the same reflected on corp. Board under siege. Inside Harley's headquarters, things once filled. Report. Then class action filings arrived faster than marketing could spin them. Executives watched share prices wobble as news outlets picked up the story. For a company built on image, the perception of betrayal was more dangerous. Doors internal. He ate the technical challenge. It was a brand issue. Confidence. Link. Investors wanted answers. Why had management ignored early engineering warnings? Why were bullets used instead of recall? And how full transparency cost in compensation lawsuits? Leadership changes followed quietly. To the senior manager, product integrity stepped down. A task force formed to review customer satisfaction metrics, a polite phrase that really meant damage control. At the same time, engineers told to accelerate development of a next-generation powertrain. But designing a new engine doesn't rebuild trust overnight. It wanted honesty, not prototypes. During 1/10, the pool admitted the company did not respond swiftly enough to yield concerns. For Wall Street, that sounded like responsibility. A writer, it like too little, too late. The gap between boardroom and blacktop had never felt wider. Herald were shrinking. I'd hoped that fixes could quiet the outrage, but the riders weren't done yet. Buried in the engines was still burning hot. How Milwaukee-Eight starves itself. Every machine, the truth through its failure. Engineers finally tore apart the Milwaukee-Eight. They found that the same power that gave it its legendary torque was also its curse. The scavenging system. Heat and load. Independent analyst studying dyno result. Pooling urged to flow. At cruising temperatures, small pocket. Pump scavenger stay. That trapped oil in the head, starving the crankcase of lubrication. Pressure dropped, bearings ran dry, functioning, and the engine turned against itself. It was a design failure. The Milwaukee-Eight's dual pump demanded perfect timing, balance, something, trapping oil below the crankshaft. Liked, oil misted. A silent confession of engineering. These discoveries were not theory. Viewed by hundreds of thousands of readers online. Every measurement, every worn bearing told the same story. This engine was suffocating its own oil. Should have a masterpiece of American engineering became a lesson in what happens when pride outruns physics. And just as one flaw exposed itself in the crank, another was hiding deeper. Oil didn't stay where it belonged. The primary links the transmission. Every Harley technician knows the engine transmission in primary case, 3 chambers in a delicate and management. But with the mill, ants burned chaotic. Let fishing fluid mine. A subtle but costly problem. Riders would service their bike overfilled and dry. The company labeled it oil transfer, as if the end were polite, going from itself. In reality, it was bleeding in turn. Photos showed vent by fixing pressure imbalances and in primary. Bill pushed past the primary, clutches, and not imagine. A quiet bulletin surface unit instructing dealers on an updated inner recall. The official note described it as, and though every mechanic who handled it knew of repair, formed the fix that the difference was immediate. The clutch feel returned, engaged and stable. A migration stopped. The problem had been solved mechanically, yet never acknowledged publicly. But behind the sealed cases and polite bulletins were people, workers who saw these flaws every day and were told, and they didn't exist. The workers who couldn't speak. Inside Harley's factories and dealers, to the machines, were the most trapped by silence. Workers assembled in Wisconsin noticed early on that pumps were being reworked and replaced mid-production. Questions to supervisors, but the answer they were told were routine revision. Many knew these changes were just to patch a problem. It's in design, not on the floor. Dealership techs watched repeat failures but couldn't say defect. Parts marked for destruction were rebarked by non-disc. Silence wasn't loyalty anymore, it revival. Anonymous technician described how each new service bulletin, when we replaced upon fixing bikes, we were resetting the clock. For workers who grew up believing Harley stood for deep, throated, found their voices and turned that side, were rallying cry. Honesty, not silence. Subscribe right now. We're uncovering the truths Harley did ride, knowing the truth is finally on our side. The brother, out of anger, grew something stronger. Unity. Across every region, Harley ride in organizing not just rides but investigations. What started as scattered conversations online turned into a coordinated dog determined to protect their own. Podcast dedicated to dissecting leaked bulletins. YouTube channels once focused on gear review. Riders across borders translating service data and publishing guides that rivaled factory manuals. They weren't fueled by hate. They were driven by love for the machine that had betrayed them. Every tutorial, every teardown, every live stream was an act of defiance and preservation. The Brotherhood that once relied on corporate pride now relied on collective knowledge. They exposed serial number clusters, tested aftermarket solution. They even printed improved oil passages to fix what the ignored. It was grassroots engineering at its purest form. As the movement grew, Harley's corp silence began to look smaller. The company that once in real time, by the very right, its legacy. Forum turned into archives, YouTube comments into case studies, and garage floors in bathrooms. Later spoke of see not as a wish, but as a duty. And as the question echoed, regulators and the Harley-Davidson's greatest defense, but silenced. In front of government began filing of Federal Highway Traffic Safety Administration reports and entered the federal record. Denial for failure. Individually, they were anecdotes. Together, they became data. Regulators began connecting dots Harley hoped would stay scattered. By mid-2024, federal documents, including the now infamous Service Bulletins M1450 and TP 466. Those files, once labeled confidential, public data. Read the language. Harley-Davidson oil transfer concerns. The euphemism. Capitol Hill noticed. A small committee on consumer safety convened to ask why one of America's most iconic brand directly to engine safety. Congressional aides called it the most polite cover-up on record. Behind the scenes, aid whether Harley's reporting laws, even if no criminal intent could be proven. The optics were terrible. Hearings quiet but symbolic, a signal that legacy no longer excused. Rising in the expect opportunity. When Harley faltered, others repped up. Indian motorcycles, Harley built around 4 simple words: heritage without compromise. Billboards showed riders with captions like "no leaks," though the message was unmistakable. Struggled to compete, suddenly sprock of riders in black leather gets rooms out of curio. W's touring division joined the chase, quoting its R18 line with phrases like engineered tradition. Triumph. Reliability. In a market by emotion and tactility had entered the generation of riders, loyalty speeches, they want late that worked. By late 2024, Harley cruiser share fell below 50% at Indian and BMW, sir. These weren't random gains, but confidence transferred, while Harley stuck silent rules one ride. Parented real reliability that spoke, then heritage. Yet while competitors in ground, the people inside Harley's own factories faced a more personal struggle, balancing pride with the shame of what they saw slip through factory gates. On the lines of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, the noise of production hides many emotions. Workers took pride in bolt and bearing, building just a job, it was a calling. But as the Milwaukee-Eight scam unfolded, that fracture. Workers watched headline, blamed the company. Some whispered to each other that the problem wasn't just mechanical, it was moral. Union representatives collecting statements from about quality. Few mentioned being told to meet quotas even when parts perfectly. Others described midline with little explanation. If someone were patching, one could. Management meetings grew tense. I'll serve trust and quiet frustration between shifts. One veteran assembler with 20 years of plant summed it up. We build legends, but legends shouldn't leak. Spread like wildfire through internal chats. Work wanted a punishment. They understood that airhead engine was a black mark on their craftsmanship, but they also knew the orders came from above. Pride and fear rattled on every line. And while the factory wrestled with cons, the riders themselves realized they could anyone else to fix what was broken. The right's next move. Erica, in community that exposed the scandal, vaping a movement for change. Right from group dedicated to transparency, safety, and consumer rights. They weren't driven by anger anymore, but by determination. Organization drafting had led to Harley leadership and to led in an oversight of engine design. Berks became town hall with mechanics hosted. Factions. Pause. What began as outrage evolved into advocacy. Writers united, but to defend the integrity of American craftsmanship, consumer, and publishing right documentation guides, helping us track service history and report defects. Each built a living record that no corporation could erase. Independent journalists picked up the following the paper trail from factory floors to boardroom minutes. Every revelation chipped away the old power den. For the first time in decades, the writer, not the executive, was the narrative of Harley-Davidson. Transformation profound. The roar of the Milwaukee-Eight had once symbolized rebellion against authority. It symbolized accountability against deception. Rajid's old banners still proudly, but them lay new tool, spreadsheets, or hits, and cameras aimed at transparency. The legend wasn't dead, it was being rebuilt by the people. Law, the truth. And so, question remains, carried on every mile of asphalt ahead, will the next era Harley-Davidson use to let history repeat itself? Harley built, but somewhere along the way, honesty took the back seat. The Milwaukee-Eight should have been their proudest engine, not another secret buried in a service bulletin. If you've seen these issues on your own bike, drop your year and mileage in the comments below. Keep the receipts rolling. Hit that like button if you believe riders deserve the truth. Excuses. And if you're new here, subscribe. Around this garage, we don't take the factory's word for it.